The city was still asleep. Before dawn on April 18, 1906, San Francisco lay quiet under a pale sky. Street lamps flickered. Horse carts stood motionless. In boarding houses and grand hotels alike, people slept without knowing they were living inside the final minutes of a world that was about to vanish. At 5:12 a.m., the ground inhaled, then it screamed. A violent jolt ripped through the city, throwing people from their beds as walls twisted and floors buckled. The sound was not one sound, but many layered together, stone grinding against stone, timber snapping, iron screaming as if alive. Buildings swayed like ships in a storm, streets split open, brick facades collapsed outward, burying sidewalks in dust and blood. People woke up screaming. In cheap wooden houses, entire rooms collapsed inward. In wealthy districts, ornate mansions cracked open like fragile shells. Chimneys toppled, crushing roofs and those beneath them. The earth did not shake. Once it kept moving, rolling beneath the city in long, brutal waves. Some tried to stand and were thrown to the floor again. Others froze, clinging to door frames, praying the motion would stop. It did not. Gas lines snapped underground. Within minutes, fires ignited across the city. A man staggered into the street barefoot, his nightshirt torn, face streaked with blood. Around him, people crawled from rubble, coughing, eyes wide with shock. A woman screamed her husband's name from beneath a collapsed wall. No one answered. Somewhere nearby, a church bell rang wildly, not from a human hand, but from the building tearing itself apart. The shaking finally slowed. Silence followed. But it was not relief. It was the sound of a city holding its breath. Then came the fires. Flames burst from ruptured gas mains, leaping from building to building. With the water mains shattered by the quake, there was nothing to stop them. Firefighters stood helpless, watching their city ignite. The wind picked up, carrying sparks across rooftops and into neighborhoods that had survived the shaking. San Francisco had become a maze of fire. Families stumbled through smoke-filled streets, carrying whatever they could, grabbed children, blankets, a single photograph. Others searched desperately through rubble for loved ones, digging with bare hands until their fingers bled. Cries echoed everywhere, for parents, for children, for help that would never come. In the poorer districts, the destruction was absolute. Wooden homes collapsed entirely, trapping entire families inside. Boarding houses where laborers slept 6 to a room were flattened. Bodies lay uncounted beneath debris, their names unknown, their lives already slipping into silence. No lists were kept, no records made. Many of the dead would never be identified. As the fires spread, soldiers were called in. Martial law was declared. Orders were given. Shoot looters on sight. In the chaos, fear became as dangerous as the flames. People were killed, not by the earthquake or the fire, but by bullets mistaken for thieves, while trying to save their own belongings, or simply trying to survive. Their deaths would not appear in official numbers. They would not be remembered. The city burned for days. Entire neighborhoods vanished. Streets became rivers of ash. The sky darkened, not with clouds, but with smoke, so thick it turned day into twilight. People camped in parks, on beaches, anywhere the flames had not reached. They slept wrapped in blankets, staring at the orange glow of their city dying. Hospitals overflowed. Doctors worked without rest, amputating limbs by lantern light, treating burns with whatever supplies remained. The injured lay on sidewalks and in open fields, moaning softly, waiting their turn or waiting to die. Some never woke up again. By the second night, the fires merged into a single, unstoppable inferno. From the hills, survivors watched as San Francisco burned itself into nothing. Landmarks collapsed, churches fell, businesses that had taken generations to build were erased in hours. And beneath it, all under the rubble, under the ash were people no one would ever count. Immigrants, laborers, the poor, the forgotten. Official reports would later speak of progress, rebuilding, resilience. They would give numbers that sounded manageable. But the truth was quieter and heavier. Thousands vanished without names, without graves, without memory. Their stories ended in smoke. As dawn rose again, the city that greeted the sun was no longer San Francisco as anyone had known it. It was a broken landscape of ruins, glowing embers, and wandering survivors who could not yet understand what had been taken from them. And the fires were still burning. The fires did not slow, they grew. By the second day, San Francisco was no longer fighting individual blazes. The flames had joined together, forming walls of fire that moved street by street, block by block, swallowing everything in their path. The heat was so intense that paint blistered from buildings before the flames even touched them. Glass melted, iron twisted. Entire structures collapsed simply from the pressure of the heat. People ran until they couldn't. Families dragged carts loaded with whatever they had managed to save, only to abandon them when smoke closed in. Mothers carried children who had not stopped crying since the ground first moved. Old men collapsed in the streets, lungs burned raw by smoke, eyes red and unseeing. Some were left where they fell. There was no strength left to carry everyone. Golden Gate Park filled with refugees. So did the beaches. Thousands slept in the open, wrapped in blankets, staring at a sky glowing orange through the night. The air smelled of ash, gas, and death. People whispered rumors about more earthquakes coming, about poison in the air, about the city being cursed. Fear spread faster than the flames. Soldiers patrolled the streets with rifles. They were young, nervous, ordered to maintain control at any cost. Shots rang out in the smoke. Some were looters, some were not. A man was killed trying to pry open the remains of his own store. A woman was shot carrying a sack of bread she had taken from a collapsed bakery. No investigations followed. No names recorded. In the official story, these deaths simply disappeared. The fires reached Chinatown. Buildings collapsed in rapid succession, trapping entire families inside. Language barriers, poverty, and prejudice ensured that many cries went unanswered. Bodies were burned beyond recognition. Entire communities vanished, leaving no records, no lists, no proper mourning. Later, the city would rebuild the streets, but not the names. Water was still gone. Firefighters tried desperate measures, dynamiting buildings to create fire breaks. Sometimes it worked. Often it made things worse. Explosions scattered burning debris across neighborhoods that had survived until then. Flames leaped gaps that were supposed to stop them. The city seemed determined to destroy itself. Hospitals had become triage zones. Doctors worked without rest, hands shaking, eyes hollow. Burns, crushed limbs, internal injuries. There was no time to treat everyone. Decisions were made quickly, brutally. Who might live, who would not. Some patients were left untreated, wrapped in blankets, and carried outside to make room for others. They did not survive the night, Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. With cemeteries inaccessible or destroyed, mass graves were dug. Others were cremated in makeshift pyres. There were no ceremonies, no names read aloud. Death had become too common for ritual. Smoke from burning bodies mixed with the smoke of burning homes, blurring the line between disaster and aftermath. By the third day, the fires finally began to exhaust themselves, not because they were stopped, but because there was almost nothing left to burn. More than 80% of the city lay in ruins. Over 250,000 people were homeless. The official death toll would later claim a few hundred. Those who lived through it knew better. They had seen bodies trapped beneath collapsed streets. They had heard screams from buildings no one could reach. They had watched soldiers shoot civilians and fires erase entire neighborhoods overnight. They knew the numbers were lies, not spoken out of cruelty, but convenience. San Francisco wanted to be rebuilt. Admitting the true scale of death would slow that process. So the city moved on. New buildings rose. Streets were redrawn. Businesses returned. Newspapers spoke of resilience, of rebirth, of progress. The earthquake became a story of triumph rather than loss. The forgotten remained forgotten. The immigrants, the poor, the unnamed dead beneath the ash. Survivors carried the trauma quietly. Some never slept without shoes again. Others panicked at the sound of rumbling wagons or distant explosions. Children grew up afraid of dawn because dawn had once brought fire instead of light. Entire lives were shaped by a mourning that history would later reduce to a paragraph. Even years later, people claimed the city still felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by absence. Streets built over mass graves, buildings standing where entire families had vanished. A silence beneath the noise of progress, heavy and unresolved. The ground had stopped shaking, but something beneath the city remained broken. And far below the rebuilt streets, beneath concrete and steel, the fault still rested, waiting. When the smoke finally thinned, San Francisco looked unfamiliar, even to those who had lived there all their lives. The landmarks were gone. Streets no longer led where memory said they should. Entire blocks had been reduced to gray dust, still warm beneath the feet of those who walked through the ruins. Survivors moved slowly, speaking little, as if loud voices might wake something buried beneath the ground. They searched, not for buildings, for people. A man stood outside what had once been his home, staring at a pile of rubble that still smelled faintly of smoke and burned wood. His wife and 2 children had been inside when the firestorm reached the block. There were no remains to bury, no marker to place, only ash. He would return to that spot for years, standing silently, because it was the only place where his family still existed. Across the city, thousands faced the same emptiness. The official response moved quickly toward order. Camps were organized, food lines formed, tents filled parks and open spaces. On the surface, it looked like control had returned. But beneath that thin layer of structure was a city full of people who could not sleep, could not forget, could not explain what they had seen. Many never spoke of it again. Immigrant communities suffered the most. In Chinatown, the destruction was near total. Families who had lived there for generations vanished overnight. Records burned. Names were lost. Bodies were never identified. When the city rebuilt, officials spoke of opportunity, of modern planning. What they did not speak of were the lives erased to make room for it. Chinese survivors were pushed aside, relocated, ignored. Their dead were not counted. Their grief was not recorded. History moved forward without them. So did the city. The poor fared no better. Laborers, dock workers, servants, boarding house residents, people whose lives were never carefully documented, made up a massive portion of the dead. Without paperwork, without property, without influence, they disappeared from the story almost entirely. Official death counts stayed low, comfortably low. A city eager to project strength could not afford the truth. Those who survived carried invisible wounds. Men flinched at the sound of breaking wood. Women panicked when they smelled smoke, even decades later. Children who had wandered burning streets barefoot grew into adults who never felt safe indoors. Nightmares were common. So was silence. No one had language for trauma then. They simply endured it. San Francisco rebuilt quickly. Steel replaced wood. Buildings rose taller, stronger, safer. Newspapers celebrated resilience. Photographs showed progress. The earthquake became a tale of rebirth, of American determination. But rebirth requires something to be buried. And beneath the foundations of the new city lay thousands of untold stories. People lived above mass graves without knowing. Offices stood where families had died together. Sidewalks covered places where screams had once echoed. The city moved, laughed, worked, but something beneath it remained unresolved. The ground had taught them a lesson they did not want to remember. That control was an illusion, that progress could be undone in seconds, that modern life rested on something unstable and indifferent. Even today, the San Andreas Fault lies beneath California, quiet, patient. Scientists monitor it constantly. Sensors listen for movement. Charts predict possibilities. But deep underground, the same forces that shattered San Francisco in 1906 still exist, unchanged by technology or time, waiting. And when people walk the streets of modern San Francisco past glass towers and electric lights, they walk over a city that once burned itself alive. Over lives that ended without names, over stories that history chose not to tell. The city survived. But many of its people did not, and they were never truly remembered.